Khaldun talks about the dark arts, and especially in North Africa, which is even today actually has a reputation of proficient magician sorcerers, which is tied back to ancient Egypt and the whole history of magic in Egypt. What was your impression when you came across these passages in the Muqaddima?
Okay, one big impression I think for many people would also be what he says in essence is that magic, miracle work, they're all the same. They're in the same field. However, the difference is the uses, and the difference can be that devils are involved, but that's not necessarily the case, because then he speaks about the difference between a prophet and a saint. So he mentions the idea of a saint. So that the saint is very interesting. The saint, his connection with the supernatural, he is seeking the face of God, the love of God. He's seeking that fulfillment, that feeding of the soul in a way. But he is very antisocial. It's very, again, back to the aspect when we were speaking about homosexuality, he brings it to the material level. So the saint is able to access through their exercise, he calls it, so through fasting, through spiritual exercise, through secluding themselves from society, this level of higher level of spirituality. But they are quite antisocial, because this progress is just beneficial to themselves.
They're isolating themselves from the rest of society,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Which goes back to Sufism, by the way.
This video is sponsored by the Muqaddima program. For nearly 7 centuries, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddima has been read and studied by scholars and students of history, sociology, politics and economics as the single most authoritative and astounding work of classical scholarship in the field of history. Embark on an enlightening educational venture led by Muslim scholars and teachers delving into Islamic history, sociology, economics and beyond. Engage with cutting-edge learning cues and multimedia components, allowing for a deeper understanding of the topics. Distinguish between the lies and the truths of the narratives told, between reliable and unreliable sources. Equip yourself with the skills to conduct deep research and build confidence to combat Islamophobia. Come and strengthen your Muslim identity today. Grab the course in the video description.
For example,
Just to mention this, we will talk about it inshallah as well.
let me because he does clarify between the prophet and the saint. With regards to the prophet,
Yeah, he does.
they are very socially beneficial, because they're calling people towards the worship of one God. They are helping out society. They call towards charity, etc., etc. So that's the difference. That's the physical, material difference between the saint and the prophet. He goes on further to talk about different divisions of souls, the division of the realms. So for example, you have the lowest, which is the minerals, then he goes on to plants, and then he goes on to human beings, then
there is a continuum of existence.
Yes.
And that definitely deserves its own episode, because it's very profound in how he describes. In fact, it's a precursor to evolution, but we don't want to confuse people. I guess what I'm really fascinated by, and I believe many people are in this day and age, is the issue of the dark arts, magic, working with demons, harnessing the dark forces to influence, for example, leaders, to influence sultans, to attack people. Ibn Khaldun was living at a time where he was able to interact with sorcerers, and they would practice sorcery before him. He actually witnessed this, tying of knots, blowing on the knots, sending curses. He also witnessed another phenomenon that was tied to the practice of black magic, Sihr, in Islam, Sihr. He talks of treasure hunters, people who actually make a living hunting treasures, ancient treasures that were buried by the ancient people. And he talks of these people actually being almost in cahoots with the sorcerer, because these treasures, wherever they were buried, were protected by ancient curses. And so if you're going to hunt for them, you're risking your life and risking really being damned by these curses, which meant you had to armor yourself with amulets, talismans, and so on and so forth, which came from other sorcerers. So in this industry of sorcery, there are many players, and Ibn Khaldun talks in great depth about this. Now, one of the things that really, for me as a modern reader, fascinates me is that there is a resurgence, a new revolution in today's society of occultism, of Wicca, which is witchcraft. There's a paganism that's re-emerging.
There is absolutely.
And you have the likes of, for example, Isaac Crowley, and similar people like that, Anton Levy, the Church of Satan, and they're really reviving these principles of paganism and sorcery. The Key of Solomon, for example, these are books that people are reading today, which date back to what Ibn Khaldun talks of, and he calls it the ancient sciences, al-ulum al-awail, the ancient sciences that were practiced by the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, and left in North Africa specifically. It's very important that he mentions that because he lived in North Africa for a while. So he talks of this, and what I find interesting is that in many of the things he describes in terms of the different levels of interacting with demons, how can you utilize the energy of the demons and the unseen to influence the real world, and those different players that actually participate in this very dark and very demonic realm. Yeah.
It's a whole industry, I should say, it's a whole industry in itself as well, which is amazing.
One of the university theses that I read, they're online by the way, talking about the issue of linguism and Ibn Khaldun, and in there the author says, although Ibn Khaldun was quite superstitious, listen to that, although he was quite superstitious, he was also a very intelligent, forward-thinking person. So now, superstitious, what do they mean with that? They mean exactly what we're talking about. So they believe, certain people here in the modern life believe that this is superstition. Mm-hmm. They got it totally wrong. They have totally mixed up actually what is superstition, what is not superstition. We know in Islam that magic, blowing the knots and all this stuff, this is all part of magic which we know exists. So superstition, that is not part of superstition. And this is where they got wrong. On the other hand, again, you mentioned correctly, the Church of Satan, by the
yes.
way, which is accepted in America.
Yes.
In a city, if I remember correctly, was it Chicago?
It's a very, actually, it's a very prominent city. In fact, it's actually embraced by many of the celebrities.
Well, in the U.S.,
musicians, yes.
It is accepted.
It's a very prominent, yes, very prominent movement.
This is quite scary, to be very honest. If we have come to that point, that on the one hand people consider all this superstitious, while on the other hand we see that this not only exists, but it's thriving.
Yes.
So,
well, superstitious, I think, is a word that has to be redefined, because we have today, in the modern world, we have there's a resurgence against them. There's a re-emerging trend towards worshipping nature. So, for example, rather than saying God, people, it's it's common parlance to say the universe or nature, or Mother Nature. These are steeped in history, in tradition of pagan rituals, and specifically witchcraft. Okay, Mother Nature, the universe, to manifestation is part of conjuring. These are acts of pagan worship, and specifically witchcraft. So yes, it may come across as being superstitious, but really, I think we're seeing a new manifestation, I'm playing with the word here, of these ancient beliefs. And there is a deep interest actually in writings that date back to the Babylonian days and to the ancient Egyptian days, talking of secret scripts, curses, so on and so forth. So you find that actually this is not as superstitious as it may come across when you look at what's happening in the world today. Madame Blavatsky and also Aleister Crowley are very famous actually in terms of what they've written and what they've been preaching. They've obviously passed on, but their writings are still here and are still very influential. People are still studying these texts, and to some degree there are people who still believe that these are actual magic manuscripts and manuals that are to be practiced.
I just was thinking while we were talking about people reading the ancient documents and trying to get back into the ancient paganism. Actually, in Greece there is a sect nowadays, okay, people who meet at the Acropolis at the foot of the Parthenon, and they gather, at specific times, and they worship the sun, as the ancestors used to do in ancient Greece. Many of them actually consider themselves ancient Greek, worshipping, whatever you want to call this, atheists. Actually, they are atheists, and they consider themselves part of the ancient Greek world. and they do not want to belong to the Orthodox Christianity, which is practiced nowadays in Greece, because they know that ancient Greece had nothing to do with Orthodox Christianity, and they know that the Byzantines, who were the Orthodox, actually hated ancient Greek philosophy and ancient Greek culture. But they don't want to give up their Greek heritage, so they consider themselves rather being closer to the ancient Greeks than to the Orthodox modern culture of Greece. So we have this kind of development now.
There is, you're right, there is a revivalism in paganism as a response or as a reaction to what people consider Abrahamic faith having been oppressive or having been manipulative. They want to go back to the roots, but that brings you back to sorcery, to paganism, and these traditions. One thing that should be also mentioned is in this categorization of magic and sorcery comes alchemy. Alchemy, and quite funnily, quite interestingly, he mentions Ibn Hayyan as being the chief sorcerer of Muslims. So in the Muslim tradition, he's the chief sorcerer. But how does he tie it back to his approach to everything? Is that if this is to be true, that there are alchemists and sorcerers who can do these things, then the economy will actually implode, sorry. Because you increase the supply of gold, suddenly you have inflation, and society collapses. So he brings it back to how society could be actually demolished if sorcery becomes practiced on a wider scale. Well, two scenarios. One scenario is that it's actually not real, in which case people are being duped and are being tricked. The other scenario is it is real. However, if it is real, then what happens is you end up having obviously, as I said before, the economy
harmful to the economy,
yes.
society, etc., etc.
There's a lot to say. There is a lot of interest in, as I said before, the dark arts, Freemasonry, Illuminati. These are things that people are really intrigued by, and there's a reason for it.
It's also interesting because when he speaks about the occult and dark arts, he systematizes it. So with regards to, you could say a sorcerer, someone who's naturally inclined towards interacting with the supernatural, is much higher level than a talisman user, you could say, someone who's making talismans. So it's also interesting for people that the way it's leveled or the way it's put into a hierarchy, because then it makes it more real to people instead of the abstract speaking about something here and there. So yeah,
and he does, you're right. He talks about, for example, charlatans who sell fake talisman, fake charms, and specifically fake treasure maps. So these are people who are selling treasure maps that are fake. The treasure hunters are actually going to pursue this treasure, not really knowing that there's nothing there. So there is an industry of deceit, a web of lies that comes with that. But he does acknowledge that there are actual sorcerers who do work with devils and who do enter almost a Faustian bargain with the devils in order to actually benefit themselves in this world. Which, if you look at popular culture today, there's a certain level of not consensus, but effectively there is a certain level of acknowledgement that these things may still be present today. Actually, secret societies, pacts with devils, these kind of things. I don't think we should dismiss these things altogether, because it is a reality. In Islam, we do believe in the other world, in malevolent spirits and demons. We believe in these things. What Ibn Khaldun does actually is just he explains it in a more concrete, scientific way. Exactly, yeah.
Now, for the very first time, students of Islamic history will have the rare and unique opportunity to study this monumental and classical work of genius under the tutelage and guidance of experts in the field of research and education. To find out more about the Muqaddima program or to enlist yourself onto this unique and fantastic learning journey, please visit our website at www.al-Muqaddima.com, where you will be able to download our program prospectus, register your interest by submitting an application directly via the online enrollment form.